Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. And so Dave and his guest explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, everyone, to Clarity from Chaos. On this episode, our discussion is going to center on the LGBT movement and its implications. To lead the discussion, we are pleased to have as a guest Christian Watson. Christian is a political commentator and the host of the Pensive Politics podcast. In addition, he has his own channel on YouTube titled Christian Watson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So let's start out with the most recent fiasco at Dodger Stadium and the implications around all of that. What are your thoughts?
Well, so what happened at Dodger Stadium, for those people who may not be aware, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence were invited there to have some kind of event, which offended a lot of Christians, a lot of Catholics, and rightfully so. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence are actually a failed satire group whose entire goal is to mock Christianity by dressing up like nuns that have a very, let's say, sort of sexualized and caricaturized aesthetic to them. So I'll say this, that I don't support bad taste mockery of any sort. I don't support bad taste mockery when it comes in the form of a sitcom. I don't support bad taste mockery when it comes in the form of a failed satirist group that has no taste. But I also think that failed and bad taste mockery is endemic to what being a free society is. And I unfortunately think that there are a lot of people that, the founders understood that freedom can only be preserved if people have a conscience, a set of moral guiding principles.
A moral framework.
Right. A moral framework, precisely.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, many people, even though all human beings, whether we have the right set of values or not, are by our very nature free, do not always exercise that freedom in the best way possible. And I think that in a free society, no matter what you do, you will have examples of that. So I'm very happy that, by the way, at that Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence event, there were not many people who showed up. That entire stadium was basically empty with the exception of a few bleacher seats. But outside, there were roaring correctives from crowds of Catholics and Christians, and even people who are not Christians, who simply support good taste. So it shows to me that the cultural corrective is at an appropriate level. It's being exercised appropriately. No one got hurt, and bad ideas are being countered. And so I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, Christian, when there's going to be an alternate event, a Christian event somewhere, because all we're getting is one side of the equation constantly. We're not getting both sides of the equation.
Well, I think that Christians, and I myself consider myself one, exercise their voice and their faith all the time. We could say that some Christians are not strong in their convictions in their faith, and so they don't do so regularly or as much as they should have. But there are a lot of churches that are organizing events to signal their disdain or their criticism of Pride Month. And that's, in a free society, that's also okay. I think that We unfortunately have a society where a lot of our social institutions, which ultimately guide the health and development of the society, which is always developing, a lot of them have been hijacked by ideas that are contrary to various religions and various faiths in our nation that made America great. And so I think that it's our goal to go in there and offer different ideas and try to restore our institutions back to their proper roles. For example, the universities. Almost every single university has an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion within its halls. Diversity, equity, and inclusion basically does not view people as individuals, and in Christianity at least, the individual is one of the more important units. Christ is obviously the most important, the Logos is the most important, but the individual is one of the more important units because through our exercise of individual free will, we are able to attain salvation. We are able to connect with God, the Logos. We are able to have a relationship with Christ. But we have DEI, which is an ultimately anti-individualistic philosophy that views people as indistinguishable units in abstract groups, as opposed to concrete individuals with free will. That inherently rejects, everything that goes along with having a moral framework surrounding the individual. So we have to fight back in our own institutions and push out these destructive ideas, which don't enhance the institution. They don't actually make the institution run better. They actually fundamentally harm the institution.
Yeah. Do you wonder, as I often do, I'm wondering if this is directed at the destruction of the American family? There's some very key pillars around a moral society. One of them, obviously, we've been talking about, which is religion. The other is the family. And I'm just wondering if this has got a part and parcel to part of that destruction, because I know they've been going after the family unit for some time, and I'm just wondering if it's part of a long-term plan that somebody has in place.
Well, I'm not entirely sure about a long-term plan, but I do know that there are ideologies in our current cultural moment that actually hate the family. Communism, socialism, those ideologies fundamentally reject the nuclear family. In fact, there are strains of socialism that view the nuclear family as a product of patriarchy, a product of capitalistic oppression. This is actually the critique of the second wave feminists, many of whom are also socialists and who have blended their second wave feminist critique with socialism. In fact, there are communist seminars I have seen of communist activists saying we have to get rid of the nuclear family so that we can, build our idea of this broader community where inequity does not exist and where equality of materials, equality of resources flourishes. So there are people that believe to get to their end of the world event for the communists, it's going to be dialectical materialism, the big fight between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. To get there, you have to destroy the family. So, yeah, among some people, there certainly is a plan. But I don't think that most people, unfortunately, who are involved in politics, especially on the activist level, think very deeply about what their agenda means and how to execute it. I think most people think very emotionally. They are slaves to passion. And instead of actually trying to figure out the long-term implications of what they believe, they simply want to effect a short-term change. Look at BLM. Why has BLM now completely flamed out and it's a shell of what it once was? Well, because it was also full of con artists and grifters who took advantage of the anger of so many Black Americans. But also because BLM, the activists within BLM, aren't long-term thinkers. They cause short-term agitation. They cause hundreds of billions of dollars of property damage to economies across America. They caused more political division in America. They caused splits amongst families. And then they flamed out. There's always, in a society, there's always agitators who seek to divide, split, and destroy in every era. In the old school era, and in the 60s, it was the New Left that came around. The New Left, which did some good things, by the way. I'm anti-war. I think that being anti-war, especially in an era with the military-industrial complex, has made American dollars go towards a foreign land all the way across the ocean and not go towards our own border and securing our own nation. That's a problem. So there are some good things. But a lot of the New Left's program was very much socialist, was very much collectivist, very much hated the individual, very much hated the family, very much hated faith and tradition. And they were agitators back then. That we're seeing the same kind of thing, I think, happen today in the form of Antifa, BLM, other people.
All right. So let's kind of loop back around to where we were talking at the beginning. What about this transgender war on children that's going on? I find it appalling, some of the things that are happening. What are your thoughts around that?
So one thing has to be made clear from the offset whenever this conversation begins. There's no such thing as a transgender child. That is a false category. That category has unfortunately been affirmed by the scientific and medical consensus. And that category, by being affirmed by the scientific and medical consensus, has been morally reinforced almost in the minds of so many people who don't know better. It means a lot of Americans who then therefore believe it is an act of compassion to affirm a false ideal. So we can easily see how a false idea being affirmed by the experts can immediately become almost gospel in the hearts of men. But it's just not true. No child is born in the wrong body. No child has the intellectual or rational fortitude to then therefore say, I am not who I was born as. No child even understands the depths of what that means. Children are innocent. And for that reason, children are to be protected and shepherded by their parents through this world against ideas that would compromise their innocence. The problem is, so many parents, in conjunction with our social institutions, have compromised their child's innocence and have cratered some of their child's delusions and fantasies, and in some cases have transitioned them to, or have tried to transition them to the opposite sex. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy of monumental proportions.
Yeah, I would say, you were speaking of the children. I think the parents, in a lot of cases, or if not in all of these cases, have latched on to joining the club because it seems very chic now to have to say that you have a transgender child. And the unfortunate part is, to your point, these children, they don't know whether they're coming or going. I mean, they'd all grow up to be astronauts or cowboys, for God's sake, right? And so I how do we change the hearts and minds of these parents? Because also, like you said, you have these social experts now that are redefining male and female, which is just completely nuts.
Of course, absolutely. So what I think we have to do, we have to just assert basic first principles truths, work back towards that, and use that as our foundation. It's one of the reasons why I like Vivek Ramaswamy, speaking of the culture, so much, because he's one of the only presidential candidates, in my opinion, that actually mentions the idea of first principles. You don't really hear that said in the 21st century, or even the 20th century. I mean, I think Reagan was probably the last president to really go back, because all of his speeches are always about philosophy. And before him, Goldwater, right? So as you work back throughout our history, you can get more of what he's talking about, first principles and convictions and more. Yes. But you don't get that much in our current era. You don't get that much.
No.
And we desperately need that, because the only reason why a society can crater to false ideas is if it lacks the conviction. And one of the easiest ways to lack conviction is if you lack an understanding of moral foundations, i.e., first principles. America was built off of first principles. It was built off of certain ideas that are intractable. And the moment you say those ideas don't matter, and this contrary agenda can just come in and overtake them, which is what the progressives did in the progressive era. They literally said, the constitutional questions don't matter anymore. What matters is how to run the government, which then ensued in the separation of administration and politics, which created the deep state. That's how you easily destroy a country. And that's what happens. This is a controlled demolition.
Yeah, and I think part of their experiment was the whole COVID-19. I think that was a trial run on a lot of this stuff, because they were totally successful in manipulation of not only the domestic population, but globally.
Absolutely.
And everybody was singing off the same hymn book.
Of course, absolutely. And this is the problem. When you have expertise, when you have administration without ethics, you just have tyranny. It's just another form of tyranny. It's a tyranny with a better aesthetic, but it's tyranny nonetheless. And so this is one of the criticisms I actually made of the lockdowns in America and also in the UK, which were also pretty bad. And the criticism was this: we have all these experts informing political decisions without giving due consideration to basic ethical principles. The moment you have that, there is no limitation, there is no corrective on what they can do or how they can do it, which is why I always emphasize the importance of society to work back to first principles. We need a revolution of the mind in this country, in the West, really. The West didn't come about because there were a bunch of people that came in one area and decided they wanted to make something. The West was a gradual, multi-century process that birthed up from philosophical principles, from discovery of science, discovery of the humanities, discovery of art, when beauty actually meant something, and beauty was embossed and embodied in so many of our images of public life, whether that be the churches, whether that be buildings, whether that be art in general. All of these things came together to make what we now know as a Western civilization. And we have to get back to thinking in a similar way to how the progenitors of our civilization thought, not in terms of the substance, right? Obviously, we don't want slavery. Obviously, we don't want any of that. But in terms of the form, they thought deeply. They thought philosophically. They considered things. They didn't always get everything right. But I tell you, we had a much better North Star long time ago in the ancient civilizations of Western civilization than we do right now in the digital age.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because our country was basically, and our civil laws were basically generated out of the concepts into the Geneva Bible. That was the foundation of a lot of our civil laws. And so therefore they had a North Star that they were working to. And to your point, they may not have always been right, but they had something that was foundational that they were working with. And I do believe I can't tell you any politician other than the current Vivek Ramaswamy who's talking about these things. None of the other politicians are even giving the appearance of deeply thinking about a lot of these issues, and they're just pandering to the moment of the question of the moment. They're not. I just don't see a lot of thought behind it, Christian.
There's not. And our politics right now is very empty and vacuous, to be honest with you. And it really hurts me because there are entire industry of political consultants that get paid off of public ignorance. If the public thought deeply about a lot of these issues, political consultants would not be in business. Because what do they always tell you? You have to dress this way. You have to talk this way. Ooh, if you're in front of a group of black people, don't say this. Don't say that. Don't say that. They literally tailor. Yeah, they literally tailor your entire message towards caricatures of different groups in the public.
Right.
Vivek has actually, and it's really interesting, he has explicitly said, my consultant said, don't say this. I'm going to say it anyway. And that is real authenticity. And that is one of the reasons why I do believe he's a dark horse candidate. And I think, again, it's early, but I think he has a very good chance of actually prevailing in some way, shape, and form. I think that he has a chance in prevailing in the race, whether that be by getting second place, whether that be by getting first place. Time will tell. But if his message gets out there and his message sticks to the minds of Americans, I genuinely believe that he will have made a big impact.
Well, and I believe he's going to make a big impact. Now, whether the boys club allow that impact to go forward or not remains to be seen. But I do believe he's going to make an impact because he, like I said, he's the only one that I'm aware of that's actually speaking about things in a thoughtful, deep way. And you can see it in his interviews. You can see that he's not orchestrated by anything, that he's absolutely authentic, that he has sat down and thought about this stuff deeply. And the other thing is, he's not part of the good old boys club. He's another outsider, much like Trump was. The only difference is, Trump's a pretty good ringmaster, where Vivek, I don't think, is. Vivek's much more scholarly about it than Trump is. So I'm not really sure, but I would love to see him up there and come out of this with his voice, just like with Dr. Carson, with his voice being there somewhere that you could listen to.
Trump is the bull. Vivek is the calm owl. I like to use animal analogies, and that's
Right.
that's how I see it. And the bull has a lot of brute strength, but the owl, by virtue of being able to fly up into the sky, and by virtue of being calm, has a lot of wisdom. When you combine both of those two characteristics, you become dangerous to the established class. Because they can handle an owl. There's been many owls that have been our politicians and our presidents. Barry Goldwater was an owl. Very intellectual, very smart man, but he wasn't a bull. He wasn't a bull. Now, Donald Trump is a bull, but they were able to wrangle him and keep him confined and surround him with people who didn't have his best interests at heart. And, basically it was business as usual with a few disruptions in Washington. And that wasn't due to him. That was due because the system figured out how to handle him.
Yep.
And that's why one of the reasons why I think Trump is a threat, because if he got back in office right now, he knows how the system would try to handle him. And I think that he would just completely pulverize it, which is why they're trying to indict him, which is why they're trying to basically prevent him from getting back into office, because they understand what would happen if Trump got back into office. So you have to combine both characteristics if you're going to be successful. And I think that Vivek can be a bull. He has that bullish quality to him. Just look what he did to Don Lemon. That was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
It was incredibly brutal. And look what he did to that same thing to Dana Bash. I think that the more Vivek gets out there, the more he refines his sword, so to speak, his rhetorical sword, the more bullish he becomes. And if he continues to develop that bullish characteristic with his owl-like wisdom, he's going to be unstoppable.
Yep, I agree. So where can people find your YouTube channel? Just go out to YouTube and search on Christian Watson?
Yep, Christian Watson Politics. You can also go to my Twitter, which is @officialcwatson, and there is, on the first tweet is where my channel will be linked, and there's all other stuff for me. He can follow me too.
And the podcast the same way?
Same thing as the channel. Yeah. It's just Pensive Politics and it'll pop up. Well,
it's been an absolute pleasure. We've been talking to Christian Watson, who's the political commentator and host of Pensive Politics podcast, and he also has his own channel on YouTube, which is Christian Watson. Again, it's been an absolute pleasure, Christian, having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.